morning, all. Call this meeting of the Review Committee to order, and we have the roll call, please.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you call to order. I apologize. Okay, we have Chair Kaup,
Here.
Vice Chair Jacobson.
Here.
We have committee members Brocksterman,
Here.
Lloyd,
Here.
Martin. Here. And Sturritt.
Here.
Okay, we have 6 present.
Okay, thank you. You all had a chance to look at the minutes from the meeting of January 29. Are there any additions or corrections that anyone
Yes.
would like to make?
Please. My first name is spelled C-O-N-N-I-E.
Thank you.
And Brenda, I have one correction on the second page of the minutes. This would be the third complete paragraph down. Chair Kaup suggested.
Okay.
On the third line, the name is Morrison. It should be Morris, Alan Morris,
Okay.
M-O-R-R-I-S.
Thank you.
Is there any other changes to be made? Okay, could I have a motion to accept the minutes as corrected?
I move that we accept the minutes as corrected from
Second.
29.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to accept the minutes as amended. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. As you know from the packet, we've got 2 very distinguished speakers today, conferees, and I'm very, very pleased that they agreed to appear. First presenter, conferee, is Jim Reardon. I've known Jim off and on for the last 40 plus years, I guess. He was served for quite a while as a city councilman here in Topeka, as an attorney, and some involvement with the Kansas Association of Counties for a few years.
That is correct.
For a while anyway, Jim.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, the principal reason Jim's here is that he chaired the previous Government Review Committee, the 2014 committee, and you've all received the report that was generated by that committee, and I hope you've had a chance to review it. I asked Jim to be here, and I mentioned this at the meeting on January 29, that I thought it'd be helpful to hear from him as to how he put the committee together, operated, the procedures that were followed, and obviously the formatting of the report and presentation to the governing body. Jim, there's not too many parameters here. We just want to benefit from from the work you guys did back in 2014, and I'm sure there'll be many questions as well. So have at it.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you all for serving on the committee. It's a pretty good commitment. There's quite a bit of time involved, and I think it's a great exercise. Citizens committees are some of the very best because you get citizenry involved, and this is a committee in which you can get a lot of citizenry involved and make a lot of contacts and learn a lot about city government. It was just a wonderful opportunity for me to serve as chairman of the committee. Just by a way of background, I think this year is my first year that I haven't drawn a paycheck for 70 years, which will give you some idea that I'm an older person. But basically, I had several years involvement in government. I started out as executive director of the County and District Attorneys Association, and back in the 1970s, as Jim alluded, I was director of legal services for the Kansas Association of Counties. I was also, I ran a government agency for the Kansas Department of Administration under the Graves administration for 5 years. And of course, I was a city councilman. So I've had experience with all forms of state government, state and city government. And it's been one of the great privileges of my life to be involved as a citizen like yourself. We had some parameters to start out with, and if you go back and look at, and I know you've reviewed, but what I'd like to do is, if you have copies of, which I think you do, the committee report, I'm just going to go through and talk about highlights of it and kind of decision points that we had, and then I'll be more than happy to stand for any questions. But what I should tell you about, up until 10 years ago, the citizens committees, every time they met, every 10 years or every decade or so, they were addressing some issue. And the first one was the issue of moving away from the commissioner form of government and to the city council form of government. And that was a large, very large citizens committee, and they worked for many months to come to the conclusion that it was time to move on from the form of government that they had and to go to the city council form of government, the council mayor form of government. So and then as time went on, we had to make some adjustments to that. We had what they called a strong mayor, referred to as a strong mayor form of government, and after about 10 years, and each of those, by the way, is very much affected by the personality of the mayors and the council members. And there came a time where, and part of the time when I was on city council, and to give you a background there, I served for 3 terms, and during that time, I served as deputy mayor a couple times in 2 of those terms. And what we found during the last term was that we became very contentious. We had a mayor who was we had a polarized council and mayor, and a lot of the citizens were fed up with it. We were fed up with it. It was time to reconfigure, to come up with a better solution, I guess. And so the next time we met, one of the influences on the city council was Lisa Stubbs. Lisa ran for mayor and wasn't successful over Bill Bunton. Bill Bunton became mayor, but she was successful in selling the idea of what we call a weak mayor and a strong city manager. And at that time, they said, we're just going to marginalize what the mayor is going to be doing. He's going to be mainly doing ribbon cutting and greeting the citizens that come into the city. We're going to marginalize the importance of the mayor. We're going to cut the salary. It's going to be more of a figurehead. And that's what transpired. That was the kind of ordinance that were written at the time. At the time also there was the issue of a charter ordinance, and that goes to the issue of home rule. I won't go into that because Jim's an expert on that, and you'll know plenty about that as you go. But we suddenly had legislation, if you will, that supported a weak mayor, but they forgot to check with Mayor Bunton about that. He had no intent to be a weak mayor. And he ran it in the strong mayor form. He was much more palatable than the polarizing council members and mayor before, so everybody just kind of let him run with it. And so what you had was legislation written for one kind of mayor, and the actions being entirely different than what the legislation indicated. So when I was tapped to be the chairman of the committee, we already had a legislative problem. And so as far as Mayor Wolgast was concerned, he wanted to get that straightened out. Between him and Bill Bunton, they were pretty much in agreement that we've got a mess here, and we need to straighten it up. Well, also, during that time period, Lisa Stubbs, who ran for council again, lost by 2 votes. And so the person that most influenced the idea of a weak mayor didn't return to the council. And but she still had influence. And so we were handed, first of all, the mayor charged us with the charge to straighten out the legislation. Well, fortunately, and we had wonderful city staff, city mayor, city clerk, and everything was pretty much in hand to begin with. The proposed legislation, all of that was given to us to consider, and so we knew we had a legislative issue. We wanted to also figure out what else, while we're here, what else should we be doing? And of course, the statute is pretty clear that you're here to study the form of government and to make recommendations on what can be done better. And so it was very simple for us. We didn't have any, other than the legislative part of it, we really didn't know where to go with it. But we decided that our conferees would send us in the right direction, which they did. And so we wanted to invite as many conferees as we possibly could, because we got a lot of different angles on government and things that were working and things that weren't. And so we pretty much we set the agenda for the conferees and then let the conferees help us determine what our direction was going to be. And it ultimately came down to corrective actions for legislation. We had administrative guidance. We found in meeting with the conferees that they had administrative issues that they wanted to be heard on, and many of them are valid, and many of them were ones that I heard on 3 terms on the city council that came up frequently. But the main thing was that we wanted to also represent the public interest. We wanted to really make sure that they were heard and give them evidence that we did hear them, and we wanted to be responsive. And so what guided our report ultimately came out of what was recommended by the conferees, and we wanted to cover enough issues so that if they read the report, they'd know that we heard them. And we were blessed with having Brenda on our, you're blessed with having Brenda here, frankly, because 1, she's been through it before, and 2, she took meticulous notes. And so you know how it is when you're listening in a conference, some things will slip by you. And if you don't take good notes, which I've never been good at taking notes, then sometimes you miss the importance of what you're hearing. And she had everything verbatim. And so we could go back afterwards and look and see, oh, I see what they mean now when they were talking about that. Well, if we hadn't had that kind of staffing, then we couldn't have done that. Also, we had the benefit of the Mayor Wolgass's assistant. She sat in on each of our meetings, and she made sure that we got publicity for the committee. She was our go-between between her and the mayor. The mayor said, I'm turning my staff over to you because this is important to me, and I want to make sure you get it right. And so we were blessed with two really talented people. And I think it's very important, if you haven't already, to see if you can invite the mayor's assistant to be here, Jane. I guess I should mention, by the way, that I serve on the what's called the Topeka Land Bank, and one of our committee members is Spencer Duncan, city councilman, and I find Spencer to be one of the most well-versed people that I know. He had the same kind of job that Jim did with the League of Municipalities. These are the smartest people when it comes to municipal law and municipal practice that there is. So you've got a chair that's well-versed and very knowledgeable in that to begin with. And you have, as conferee, I'm sure, Spencer Duncan. You also got Neil Dobler. Neil was formerly the interim city manager. He was on the staff, the planning staff for the city. So you and I'm kind of lost touch with the council members, but I know that you're blessed with some really talented council members. Because I've been in front of them before, and I listened to some of they're much better. Certainly, there's not the contentious spirit between the mayor and the council members, and each council member and each other. I think it works really, really well, and I'm impressed with the caliber of city council that we have. So all of them will be good conferees, and all of them will give you some ideas, I think, as you go along. Does that make sense? We certainly wanted to hear from the public, and public hearings have always been a part of it. And we were surprised, I think. We didn't have a lot of public participation, but what we had was really quite good. One of the conferees was really pretty much an expert on municipal law, and he had his own ideas, and sometimes they conflicted with the way we're running the government, but he was very knowledgeable, and he wrote a very long paper, and one that we got some good ideas out of. We had some recurrent themes, and I'll go over those with you, and I think you'll get them again. So let me just kind of fly through the plan itself, and we'll kind of go from there. But in this case, our mission was legislative first, and so we started to tackle that issue. And the main problem is, as I've outlined to you, is just that the legislation didn't dovetail with the form of government and the way it was being run. And the big issue had to do with the role of the mayor, and the way we were conducting city council meetings was that the mayor was not a member of the governing body. The mayor was the mayor, and he was kind of run like, and he would preside over the meetings. But he didn't vote, except he could veto. And there were a few things that he could vote on, and I have those spelled out for you in the addendums. But he was not a part of government. He was not a part of the governing body. a lot of the legislation that was written by the legislature had to do with the governing body, of which the mayor was kind of not one of them. And the issue of when the governing body votes, the mayor didn't vote, but yet he was part of the governing body. The Attorney General ruled on the, when it came to the charter ordinance, you had to have, I think we had to have 2/3 majority on it. And that meant you had to have 6 out of 9, except that the mayor made the 10th person, and the Attorney General ruled that the legislation says that the mayor is actually part of the governing body. And so you had, instead of having 6, you had to have 7 votes for, and I don't think they had it at the time when they were considering the charter ordinance. So all of that is why it had to be straightened out. And fortunately, we had the legislation already written, so it was really a matter of just selling it, helping sell it to the council members. Most of the council members felt like the changes were necessary, so there wasn't a lot of blowback from them. And so the hardest part for us then became what recommendations should we make that would help administratively address some of the things. And let me give you just one example. The salaries on the city council members had not been raised for at least 10 years, but we had inflation, we had, and they had more responsibility that we had when we were on the council, but the council members didn't want to be perceived as pushing for their own interests, so that was an issue that just didn't get addressed. We felt like we're in a position where we can address that, and we were helped by the public. Some of the public said, you need to pay more money to the council members. And so we could present that idea and relieve what I call a stress level. And that was one of the things that we had: corrective actions, we had administrative guidance, and then public interest and pressure release. And the pressure release is a matter like that. And so as we met with the public, what we found was that there were a number of recurrent themes, and one of those, I'll just walk you through the pages here, but yeah, so when we met with the public, I'm going to take you to page 6, areas of concern. When we began to meet with the public and with our conferees, one of them was Don Moeller. Don was the legal counsel for the League of Municipalities, and he pretty much walked us through what a governing body was, how it was defined, and what we had to know about it, and that helped us greatly. When we met with the public, then we found that, and we met with the council members, we found that one of the issues that came up a lot, and it also came up with the public, was at-large representation. What that meant is the mayor is elected at large, the city council members are elected by district. There were people who felt like we ought to have some representatives on the city council that are elected at large. Okay, if that's the case, then how many should be elected, and how are they going to be elected, and how are they going to be used? I can't say that we, as a committee, thought that was a great idea. On the other hand, it was a recurring theme, even among council members. It was proposed by one of the council members, and ironically, and Neil Dobler, at the time he was representing, I think, Go Topeka. He was like the chairman of Go Topeka, as well as being being served at the time, at the beginning of the time, as interim city manager. he had, some of the city leaders thought we ought to have that. So that quickly became an issue that we felt like we needed to weigh in on. Should we have elections at large? We also heard, there's no clear direction, and that's true because we kind of meandered through the different kinds of government, and so what we wanted to try to add was a little bit of address the issues that the public was the most concerned about, and to put some of those things at rest, and also to make proposals that maybe even the council members can't make themselves just because they don't want to. And one of those that another example would be term limits. You often hear about term limits and how we ought to have term limits, and we were surprised to find that none of the conferees, public conferees, asked for term limits. The more I thought about it, the more we studied it, the truth of the matter is the only time it's ever been brought up, it's been brought up by council members. And I think they bring it up, I think they brought it up simply because they wanted to curry favor with the public, particularly if they were running for office. We'll go down there and we'll implement term limits and thinking that's a good idea. The public wasn't clamoring for it, so really the only people that were clamoring for it were the people that were being elected to office. And those people, I called it a solution in search of a problem. It just wasn't a problem. So we didn't make any recommendations in that regard, except later on when they were considering term limits, I did go in and say, where's the problem here? And it was a great relief to some of the council members to say, okay, I'm fine, I feel good in voting against term limits because there's a reason for it. And the prime reason why you would have term limits on city, it happens frequently with the state legislators, but the only major reason that we could find when we did our research was that city council members, if there was corruption involved or there was claims of corruption and so forth, then term limits seemed to be one of the solutions that you could consider. But we had no problems with corruption and have never had in all the time that I served. And I don't think that's ever been a problem, other than we had a mayor that was relieved of being a mayor, but it wasn't so much, it was more a matter of, it wasn't a big matter of corruption, so involving money and that kind of thing. So those are things that we could address that maybe we hadn't been given the agenda for, but I mean, they weren't on our agenda, but that's what these things came up. So they all came to us, and so we had, the issues had to do with election, some of it had to do with election dates. So the legislature was proposing at the time that the elections for city council and the county commissioners should be held in the same time that the state elections are. And the idea was, well, you'll get more interest in voting when you have a wider slate of candidates and a bigger number of people to vote for. And that would be an assumption that you might naturally make. But the truth of the matter was that in places where that had become an issue, it didn't really increase the votership. We only had about 10% of the public that votes either way in those kinds of elections for city positions. The League of Women Voters and the League of Municipalities were both opposed to moving it, mainly because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The people that go there care about city government. They're there for a purpose, and that's to elect our city leaders. And they're perfectly happy with it. So why change it? Also, the feeling was that politics would, it's non-political office, and the feeling was that once you put the voting in with other, the party affiliations and so forth, then you would make it more political. And they didn't want it to be more political. They wanted it to be much more receptive to non-political control and the way it was run. So we began to perceive these things, and these were all things that we addressed. And we made our own recommendations after hearing the good reasons why these should be. Because we had met with all these interests, then what we could do then was sit down and say, what are we going to recommend now, based on the knowledge that we've gained, putting the legislative part aside, which nobody was, it wasn't a problem as far as the city council members were concerned, nor the public, to do the legislative part of it. So I'll take you to page 10, and it will talk about the recommendations. And then I'll pretty much just leave it open to you. So we ended up recommending that all 9 districts be retained, and that all district representatives have an equal vote, equal power. We pretty much knew how the public and the recommendations that were being made should be. If we were going to do having at-large council members, we were pretty much agreed that there'd be 6 and 6 council members and I think 2 representatives, or maybe 7 and 2, I guess it was. But we weren't in favor of that. And part of it had to do with going back to the old form of government that we had when we had commissioners. And Doug Wright pointed out that when we had city commission, all of the commissioners, which turned out to be not exactly right, but he said all the commissioners were pretty much old white guys. There were no women. There was no minority representation. At the time, all of them lived west of McVicker, so we didn't have a very broad representation there, and that was one of the reasons why we adopted the council form of government to begin with, was because we got 14,000 people in each district, 14 or 15,000 in each district. They're pretty well distributed, and that's a great way to run them. We think that's a great way to run the city. We thought that all 10 governing body members should vote, which meant the mayor, and that's what the legislation was geared to do. So we went along with that idea. We thought that was very important. So we were certainly in favor of that. One of the citizens pointed out that there's an unfairness built into the election process for city council members, and that is that odd-numbered city councils districts, even numbers, like I was in 6, I could run for mayor, and if I lost, I could still retain my council seat because my election didn't come up for 2 years. But if you were in the odd-numbered districts, your service on the council came up at exactly the same time that the voting for the mayor came up. So you had to give up your council seat in order to run for mayor, if you will. And there's only about 3 solutions to that. One is that you have elections every 2 years, and what Brenda found out was that a lot of the other cities either have two-year reelections, but, or you do it 6, so that the odd number of people came up every 2 times up, they had a chance to run for mayor, and but we didn't recommend either of those changes, either going to 2 or going to 6. So we stayed with the 4. So you begin to get the idea. You see how the conferees drove the issue there, and the people like the League of Women Voters, the League of Municipalities, the voters in general indicated they were pretty happy with the way things were being conducted. So when they voted, we recommended we keep that. And so all those issues begin to, and we wanted the public to know that we heard them. And so we collected a lot of data, again, thanks to Brenda, because she took down what they said verbatim. And we published that here because we wanted them to know that we did listen and we did hear. And not only that, you can go back and see what they said and also show how we addressed it in our committee decisions. And so in each of our committee meetings, we talked about what we heard. We talked about issues that we thought needed to be brought up at this particular time. And but we addressed each of the issues that we heard and made decisions on whether we wanted to bring it forward in the form of, or is there some other matter you could solve their problem without doing that. And one of them, Mrs. Hiller, she had a whole list of things that she wanted to be done. Well, it couldn't be done in the ordinance. And so we recommended that they have a city policy manual so they could address some of the things that she felt like need to be addressed. So we tried to help them, even if we're not going to make recommendations in that regard. We're going to find another method to do that. So, well, I'm rambling here, and I'm going to stop. You got the general idea, I think, of just let your conferees be your guide. I'm not aware of issues that there's just a crying need to be addressed like we had with the legislative issue that we had 10 years ago. For the first time, you're going to be considering pretty much what we considered. You're not addressing major changes in the form of government, putting aside the legislative part. So it's mainly, I think, unless I'm wrong, Jim, have you been charged with certain things that need to be addressed?
Well, let me ask you this, Jim. You made it clear that you guys in 2014 kind of hit the ground running. I mean, you had issues that were handed to you and other things that were going on in the community. We don't have any marching orders.
Yeah.
And we're sitting here in a room without any public attendance at all. I don't know of any groundswell issue out there. And maybe you'd be thoughtful about, getting what you wish for. But how do we identify the problems? Do you have a suggestion? I think we're going to hear from city council members. We'll hear from the city manager, hear from the mayor, a few other folks, and then input from the public. But, we're on a short timeline, and I don't know if there are issues out there that the public wants to have addressed or officials in the city government would like to see addressed.
What is your timeline?
We have to dig those out.
What is your timeline?
We have to present our report in June.
Okay, so.
All right, I think early July, I guess.
All right, so that's
Somewhere,
4 or
it's a
5
6-month
months, and
deadline.
you're not going to need any more than that. We met weekly, and I noticed almost all these other committees met weekly, but doesn't mean you have to if you don't have that many things to address. But I believe once you start bringing in conferees like Duncan, he's got definite ideas about. I think you're going to get some definite ideas about maybe where he'd like to go. I think I'm sure Karen Hiller will have some ideas, and I think Neil may, once you start talking with them. And Mrs. Alcala, I think you'll get some help from them when you invite them in to be conferees as to what needs to be addressed.
But my biggest concern is getting input from the public, reaching out.
Yeah.
And you had the luxury of, in 2014, the newspaper was much more,
Yes.
I mean, a paper copy of the newspaper was actually read in the community, much more so than today. I'm not sure how people get their local news. It seems like it's a different situation today than,
Well,
and you did have newspaper coverage.
we had newspaper coverage, but that was originated by the mayor's office. If the mayor contacts the paper and says, here's some issues that need to be addressed, they get it, you'll get some press. And his office did that for us. I don't know that he can, whether we can get the kind of response that we had 10 years ago, just because we don't have a home paper anymore. But that's where the help came from. I didn't have to do much in that regard. I didn't feel like we got enough publicity out, and we only had 2 public hearings. But we didn't get a lot of issues from the public that were there, but we always did get, why don't we go back to the old form of government? So we wanted to address that, and I think you'll get that again. There's still a lot of old timers out there that think we ought to go back to the way it was, because if you had a problem with your streets, then you could just call the street commissioner and they could come down and take care of it. Now you can't even find your council member. I don't even know who mine is. So I think you'll probably hear that again. But all you're going to do is say, I heard you. We have asked the council members to deal with that issue, and we've essentially said, because of these reasons, this is why we went to it. There's no other, thanks to the research that Brenda did, there's no other cities that have gone back to the council form of government. It's a regression. And so we had plenty of reasons why that we could support that. But at least they were heard, and we addressed their issue. And you could see right here that, they did take that up and discuss it, and chose not to recommend that. But
Was there anybody that you wanted to hear from and weren't able to for whatever reason?
I don't think so. And I know, I mean, the council members are the best conferees, because they have, if there's anything out there that's a burning issue, they'll tell you about it. We did use city leaders like Go Topeka. I think in our case we had former city manager. And by the way, it started out when I was on the council, we had a city administrator. The city administrator was not a city manager. The city administrator handled the administration for the mayor. The mayor kind of ran things, and then the administrator did all the office work. One of the things that we came up with, and it was thanks to Maynard Oliverius. Maynard Oliverius was on our committee, and Maynard was quite well known in town. He was the executive director of Stormont Vale. He's probably served on every board in the city. And so he realized early that, well, the form of government we have now requires a corporate, we're a corporate entity. And so we ought to behave like a corporation. Well, how do you do that? Well, the mayor is, first of all, the council members are board members. The mayor is like the chairman of the board. He conducts meetings and so forth. And then the city manager then is the CEO, the chief executive officer. So it fits very much with the corporate image and our corporate existence, that we run it the way we're running it now. And so I think just using that as a framework to...
And Hannes, who will be, and I think you know Hannes or know of him, will be talking to us
Yeah,
about,
yeah.
a lot of his presentation is going to be on the city manager form of government.
Right.
I don't know that there's any interest in the community of revisiting the basic form of government we have. I would be very surprised if there was any serious discussion about, or any interest in changing from the city manager form of government. You didn't, do you share that sentiment?
Well, we didn't do that, but that was an issue that recurred. We heard that from 3 or 4 conferees that we should do that. You know, you hear them, you don't have to agree with them, but you definitely want to give them a hearing.
Well, you had the experience of having lived under other forms of government in
Oh,
Topeka
yeah.
and saw
Yeah.
how that operated. I think most of us are sitting here, we've been fortunate to have, to live in a community that's been under the city manager form for quite a while. Yeah.
That's true, yeah. And maybe it won't come up now, but I still hear it. Among old folks, they still talk about that.
But there was a time of chaos.
Still a few of us around, so that may come up. But, and you can look at some of the recurring themes that we had. I think you'll see some of those. You hear favoritism sometimes. Some people may bring up term limits. I mean, these are all things that could come up. I just wrote down possible issues. The size of the districts, the representation, favoritism, elections and voting, terms and term limits, zoning and properties, meetings and accessibility. Those are all things that you could hear from the public on for one reason or other. I find accessibility being an issue here because by the time you go through the security and all those things, it's kind of daunting, can be. And the way the meetings are run are a lot different than the way we ran them, mainly because of security. But so, you know, you may hear some of those issues. But it's really just a matter of giving people the opportunity, listening to your leadership, asking the city leaders, go Topeka, the powers that be, to invite them to come in. They probably will, and they'll probably bring an idea or two with them, or tell you about something you didn't know about. So I think your list of conferees is probably the most important thing from my perspective. And I was blessed because I knew a lot of people throughout my lifetime, and the fact that I existed in 3 different realms of government, I met a lot of people and I knew who to call if I needed to. So, and Jim, you've got a lot of those contacts, but maybe not as much as in the old days. But I think I would definitely talk to Spencer, ask, invite him in. He'll have ideas for you, I'm pretty sure. I'm like you, I can't think of issues that you really are burning issues that you feel like you have to get out and address right now. But I didn't, at the time, I didn't know where to start, but my conferees, after I met with them, they gave me some issues that we needed to address. And
Did you consider applying for a position this year on this review committee?
No, no. In fact, I told
your
myself, I see that that's coming up, and I was concerned about it because I wanted to know that we had people that could handle it, and I don't worry about that. I mean, I know a little about your backgrounds, but I also know that with Brenda here serving your committee, you're going to have the staffing, the staff that's important. I think you may need to work on the mayor's office and say, I want to be sure that we get this publicized, be thinking about ways that we can, avenues to use. You've got a broader range of methodology to reach the public now, perhaps, than we had back then. The paper was pretty much what you relied on. But you definitely want to have some PR. If the mayor's office says, here's a news item, it'll get published. So you need to be sure that you rely on their help to get your information out. And you have ideas, I'm sure.
We're
Yeah, so.
really
should
kind of
you-
need to move
you-
on here a little bit, but yeah.
Right, real quickly. Real quickly, I was going to say Dan Garrett is here with our communications team, and I think the biggest publicity is going to be social media. Wouldn't you agree? Things like that, because we don't have a home paper anymore, and then these meetings are being streamed live, and they're posted on the committee's website, so people can watch them if they want. So if we maybe start some social media blasts, maybe we'll get some more interest in it, so.
Questions for Jim?
Jim, I took it all in. I did read all of what you guys did, how exciting. But I did understand that's not going to be all us, because y'all handled what needed to be handled. So what I'm hearing is we will take shape once we get the city council, once we get them in, then we will be able to pick up some, some issues to deal with. And it's okay that we don't have an issue to start with. That's going to come as we have people come and tell us what the issues is, correct?
I think so.
Okay.
I mean, that's where we got, I was just like you. I thought, what am I going to do besides this legislative issue? And by the time we got through with our conferees, we had, in meeting with the public, we had enough things that we had several recommendations that we made. And by the way, I think they only adopted one of them, but we at least let the public know and everybody else know that we listened to them and we reacted to them. But
Thank you for your time, Jim.
okay.
I appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
My pleasure.
This helps a lot. May I ask, how far into the weeds did you go with your meetings? I mean, from your report, you had a number of suggestions. You said not all were taken up. I'm like day-to-day operations, relations between the city, county. It's been 10 years since some things have changed. The elections clearly is one, because it did change to August, November. Do you have any personal concerns that, you want us to address that have popped up in the 10 years?
No, I don't have any personal thoughts about that. I don't. You'll see that we had, several
It's
recommendations to
very
make. but,
thorough, very thorough.
Yeah.
It's- Yeah, very thorough.
Jim, I was pleased to see that you guys put as an appendix, I guess, the comments from Alan Lochner.
Yeah.
Alan, as you know, passed away a couple of years ago, but was a real wealth of knowledge. He was a really a very scholarly individual on local government. So you had the benefit of hearing from him. I know his comments didn't necessarily turn into recommendations, or not all of them anyway, but it was certainly good information that he presented to you.
Well, we were lucky. He wrote us a letter, and so we just published that pretty much verbatim, what he told us. And a lot of the things that he recommended were not things that we were probably going to bring forward, but some of them were, and they were quite good. And he was very studious. He was in declining health, so he was in a wheelchair, and it was a little bit hard to accommodate him, but he was a wonderful resource, public resource. And you'll find that, the people that do come to these, they care. Doug Mays came, he was our lobbyist, didn't even think, I served with Doug, but didn't really think about, how to bring him in. But he gave us the idea for the structure of the form of government under the, and if we hadn't had him show up at the public meeting, our format would not have been, and our recommendations would not have been as clear on the legislative part of it. And we didn't invite him in as a conferee, but he was our lobbyist. Well, you ought to have your lobbyists come in. These are the people looking out for your interest in the legislature. They probably have some issues or some ideas that you might want to address.
We're we're probably running behind a little schedule.
I
A little behind
apologize,
schedule here
I,
right now, but is there anything else, any member of the committee? We do appreciate you coming today. We appreciate what you did in 2014. I appreciate what you did when you were on the city council. So thank you, and many times over, Jim.
Well, I appreciate you for being my neighbor for 10 years.
Yes.
That was-
Yes.
Thank you all very much. And again, congratulations, and I'm very confident that you're gonna have a good product. And it doesn't have to be as lengthy as ours, but just give everybody a hearing, and I think you'll be satisfied. So.
Thank you, Jim.
Yes, sir. Pleasure to see you, sir.
Hannes, do you need any time to set up, or are you ready to?
I believe that I sent in my PowerPoint presentation earlier, so I don't want to do death by PowerPoint, but just want to make sure that that's available. So I'm ready to go.
Okay.
Whatever, but do you all need a break? You've been here for an hour or so.
Nah, we don't need a
No?
break. We're gonna go right through.
Okay, you have a lot of fortitude. Okay.
Hannes Zacharias is a professor of practice at the KU MPA program, which is important, significant. I sort of like, sounds like comments about Jim Reardon. I've known Hannes for at least 40 years. When he was at Dodge City and Hayes, Lawrence, Boonville, Missouri. And
I'm glad you said it correctly, Missouri, so.
Yeah. and almost, 15, 16 years in total in Johnson County, most of those years as the county manager in Johnson County, Kansas. And as I mentioned to you all last meeting, I think I can defend this statement. That's the single most responsible position in local government in Kansas. I mean, that's a lot of people, a lot of programs and all that, and he was distinguished service for Johnson County. And I think they still miss him over there. But he went from there to be the Robert Kipp, you know the
term.
full name, I
Yeah.
can't do. But Robert Kipp was the program or the position you hold at KU honors Robert Kipp, who was a Kansas City city manager
yeah.
for many years and very well respected in the field.
Yeah.
I asked Hannes to come over, and I think most of his presentation is going to pertain to the city manager form of government. And again, I don't anticipate any uprising in the community to challenge or make any basic changes in the form of government that we have, either by the public or by anybody in the city government now. But I think having the foundation that he can provide, in addition to the comments that Amanda made at the first meeting about the city manager form of government, I think it'll help us a great deal in analyzing comments that we might hear from council members, the mayor, city manager, department heads, and the public about how the city operates. So, Hannes, please proceed.
Appreciate that very much. Thank you for inviting me, and happy to be here, and nice to see some familiar faces. I wonder, Brian, did we meet before, I think, when you were in Gardner, is that right? Or so? That's what I kind of thought. Nice to see you again. So, and of course, Tamara with the league and those sort of things going on that way. So nice to be among friends here as far as that is concerned. So appreciate that. I want to start out by saying that I'm here to help. And try to provide, answer any questions you might have about city council or council manager form of governments, how the relationships work. I may be more use to you later on when you talk about recommendations, which may be something you might want to consider at the end of your conversations or as you get kind of issues going on. I want to say thank you again for your service to do this. This is challenging work, particularly that there's not giving you a specific thing to go after. So it is as broad as long, so it's going to be part of it to say, how do you want to go ahead and corral what you want to try to cover over these next 5 months? Because the chart says, basically areas of concern about Topeka government. That's pretty darn broad. And then to define basically general findings related to those concerns, and most importantly, to try to go ahead and make recommendations that alleviate those concerns. So heavy lifting there. So I think some challenges, I think Jim did a good job to say that your conferees will indeed give you some guidance of what those issues are. It's probably easier when you have a specific task than it is kind of going over here, although the opportunity is tremendous to really try to improve the community and the governance structure of Topeka, and I applaud that. So keep that in mind that I offer my services without compensation just because I like this sort of work and so forth. And if you find it helpful in the future to come back, have me come back and answer any questions, I'm happy to do so. I want to start off by saying that my experience is on the administrative side, and Jim has talked about that in much respects. I'm going to, hopefully this is working. Let's see here. Looks like it's on. Yeah, I want to go back and talk about my background a little bit. So I started out in the city of Lawrence, the assistant to the city manager there many, many years ago. I think it's when I first became encountered with Jim as far as that's concerned. Most of the downtown development work I've had a handle in as far as that is concerned years ago. I then had a chance to go to Boonville, Missouri, as city manager there. We call it Boonville, Missouri, and had the chance to go and put bridges over the Missouri River. And you know about the Katy Trail in Missouri. We were primarily instigators for that whole program. A lot of work going on that way. Then I had a chance to go out and become city manager of Hayes, America. We don't call it Hayes, Kansas. We call it Hayes, America. And I can talk to you for hours, and I won't, about water. How to get water out of the clouds, how to take wastewater into drinking water, and the western water law versus eastern water law, et cetera. But it was a tremendous experience for me. I then was going for various positions, as one does in the city management profession, to go to other communities, and was being squired to go to a suburban community in Denver when I got a call from Johnson County government that says, we have a position as assistant county manager you've not applied for. And I said, well, why should I do that? I'm from a city, you're a county. I'm western Kansas, you're eastern Kansas, which is formidable, just to let you know. And I'm small, you're large, we're wet, you're dry. I mean, we're dry, you're wet. Why should I apply? I said, apply anyway. So I did and became assistant county manager for Johnson County and did all the shuns, that being the apprehension, the incarceration, the prosecution, the adjudication, the rehabilitation of offender populations, homeless issues, and all the such that counties do that most cities do not do as far as human services was concerned, and then was fortunate to go ahead and become county manager for about 10 years. The population of 600,000 people, a $1.3 billion budget, and 4,200 employees. Really the crowning achievement of my career. When I left that in 2018, KU came calling and said, would you like to go and be a professor of practice to go ahead and really lead that, the transition between academic work and actual practical application for those who are trying to be city and county managers in the future. And I said yes, and been doing that the last 6 years. I only do that to let you know that I think I have a broad amount of knowledge that may be helpful to you as you talk about how the administration works and how this relationship between the city council and the administration, actually things get done, might indeed work. And so that's the purpose of my conversation today, is really to go ahead and talk about clarifying the relationship between city administration and the governing body as key factors in building a culture for high performance in city county, for the cities and counties. And I say that because culture is really a big part of this. And communities have culture as well. Some things are structural and some things are implementation. And I urge you to kind of figure out what the differences are about that. And culture has a lot to do with that. What sort of culture does the community have in respecting the governing body? What sort of, unwritten rules that are being honored but governing body has back to the community? And how can those be enhanced as one goes forward? So I think culture is a big part. Structure certainly can be a part of that aspect as well, but I think sometimes we talk about structure when we're really talking about culture. We're talking about relationships and how people should respond and so forth. So I'm going to talk about really more in detail that side of the activity, about how does the administration for cities and so forth work as relation to the governing body, which reflects those issues dealing about the community. And what's the language they use to go ahead and make all that work. And so we talk about it in this terms of saying bridging the gap between what is politically acceptable and what is administratively, operationally sustainable. I'm not trying to get too academic, but the idea of saying that, what the public wants versus what the staff can deliver, right? And what that means, we graphically talk about it in this way. And a lot of this work comes from one of our colleagues, Dr. John L. Banyan, who's been a longtime professor at KU, and has written extensively about this kind of work. And a brief description about that is that if you look at the x-axis here, this is time, being then and now. And the y-axis talks about the amount of learning, low versus high. And this is no condemnation. This is kind of just a revelation of what's going on. City council members basically come into the organization with some understanding. But that understanding is limited because that's not their area of expertise, right? And that learning does expand when indeed over time you go to conferences and those sort of things. The staff comes in though with a great deal of learning and understanding. And that actually goes up in a higher degree and more of an accentuated basis. Let's witness what's happening right now with artificial intelligence. And those sort of things, and uses of computers and so forth, and surveillance cameras, et cetera. Staff is dealing with that all the time. What that does, it creates, as you can see on here, the gap. A level of misunderstanding between what the elected officials want to do and what the staff is able to go ahead and do. And that becomes the area of conversation between what the staff can deliver for the community and what the community wants to have vis-a-vis the elected officials. Does that make sense? So that really becomes part of it. So another graph that looks about it is talking about, now we kind of flipped it on its head, the governing body being up, the staff being down. The chief magnifier, if you will, is the chief administrative officer, in this case, the city manager. And I think those are wonderful. Dr. Perez is doing a great job. He has a lot of experience. I respect him highly as being really a notable city manager in this profession. And I think also with Mayor Padilla understanding what's going on as well, those are really important aspects of that. And I happen to be a champion of that, and I'll be glad to answer any sort of questions about the council manager form of government and how that's different between an administrator and a manager, and between strong mayor and versus council manager, which may be one of your questions or some of your questions later on. But you see in this diagram that basically the filter, if you will, the lens through which these things get done is, in this case, Dr. Perez. The community is always activating these issues, on both sides, both with the governing body and with the staff. I want to have my snow plowed. I want to go and have my taxes lowered. Those communications go on regularly. But if you then allow everybody to go and make those changes, who is in charge and how do you administratively handle this in the most efficient and effective way possible going forward? So what this graph basically talks about is that relationship between what is politically acceptable. We need to have more in order. Let's make an example. If you want to have snow removal happen, and I know that was an issue here recently, as it is in almost every community, right, across the country. The question becomes, we can go ahead and snow plow your street right away when the snow falls. Staff says, great, we can go ahead and do that as long as you give us enough money to go ahead and do it. So it becomes that balance of saying, how much do you really want to pay for an event that's going to happen perhaps once every 2 or 3 years to the extent it did here recently, and bank that money versus how much do you want to go ahead and really provide the level of service. And that's where the balance comes in, and that's where the misunderstanding can occur as one goes forward. So I think that dynamic plays out. But when you talk about that, with those who are working on your behalf of being with regards to city staff, what is the language they use? This kind of talks about that. We talk about politics and the administration. So the center part here talks about the gap. That is the kind of idea of what their conversation going on. So let's see activities being what we perceive on the politics side. Many people view politics as a game, perhaps a benevolent game, but some as a game, winners and losers and so forth. On the administration side, that's not what they see it. It's about problem solving. We got to go ahead and plow the ground. We have to go ahead and make sure the water lines work. We got to pick up the bad guys. We got to put out the fire. So that language is different. The players are representatives, people that are elected, trustees, and I think it's a difference. Let's talk about trustees versus elected officials. And the distinction is between a legislative body and a governing body. Here's the example. The Kansas State Legislature is a legislative body. They are partisan politics. A lot of that work deals with the idea of winners and losers for the various parties. But little is a conversation about community. Whereas community really are trustees. That's why you talk about not being partisan. You talk about being nonpartisan because there are no Republican or Democratic potholes. I happen to believe that, no question about it. So you're a trustee, which means you have to go and deal with the entire whole versus an individual representative. There are pluses and negatives to that, but I think when you're talking about community, then the issues are negotiation and compromise for what's best for the community as a trustee. And I think that's important. Whereas the players on the administration side are the experts. I want to know somebody who knows about the law. I want to know somebody who knows how to go and make sure that the water lines are clean, that we fill out all the requirements, that you have clean drinking water and safe wastewater, etc. This is an important distinction in the conversation because politicians, which is not a bad term, talk about what have you heard? And you'll be doing that. You're going to hear from conferees, right? You're going to talk about the passion and the dreams, and you're going to be most motivated in most cases by the stories people tell you. The backyard I had got flooded last year, and I want that to stop. Well placed. If you're talking about the administration side, they're talking about, what do you know? How much is the flood really going to go? How high did it go? Does that happen every time? Does it happen once every 5 years? That kind of expertise going on. It's data, it's plans, it's reports. That creates an area for confusion in the way people talk to one another. Pieces, intangible versus tangible information. Currency on the political side is power, political power. And stories have a great deal to do with that political power. Whereas on the administration side, it's deeds and knowledge and so forth. Constructive versus unconstructive cooperation being part of that as well. So when you talk about governing bodies trying to go and be the best they can be, let's talk about governing body operating norms. This is the governing body. So a governing body, to be effective, has to be willing to address the difficult issues in the big picture, problems facing the community. Oftentimes people don't want to go and address those issues. It's messy, it's fuzzy, there's no clear answer. It is winners and losers. But how willing is the culture to go ahead and actually address those problems in a significant way? And there are many avenues to go ahead and do that. Some are delaying tactics, some are ways to go ahead and kind of get more information. Probably the most typical action is to go ahead and appoint a committee and kind of turf it off and see how that goes. The ability of the governing body to deal with issues as a team, not as individuals. And I know you have 9 different districts and so forth. The benefit to that, in my viewpoint, is the representation, which is formidable and great to have 15,000 people in a jurisdiction thereabouts. But it also can provide some levels of parochialism. My district didn't get the cookies. I want to have cookies. So that, how do you, as a culture, as the governing body deals with culture, to go and say, how do we develop as a team? How do we go ahead and develop a policy that is good for everyone, not just for my particular district? That's a cultural issue, not necessarily a structural issue. And the effective relationship with the staff. The relationship with the staff and the governing body is interesting, and this talks about the spheres that councils and managers kind of come into play. And this really talks about the level of involvement in these various issues and who has the kind of dominant feature in these particular areas. So when you're talking about the purpose of what Topeka government is supposed to go and do, that's a primary of the mission statement. That's primarily the sphere of the council to go and decide that. It is much about what you want to do, whereas the administration is about how you can get it done, right? So in this area, there is still some involvement by the staff. You know, Dr. Perez is going to have some ideas about what indeed the purpose should be in some broad brushes. He should bring that stuff available to the table and make that work. Passing ordinances, approve new projects and so forth, that's again a big domain of the council, but a lot of implementation in terms of how it's going to be implemented and so forth. And you can see on this graph going through kind of administration, making decisions, management as far as that's concerned, and so forth. And the line between the two, council sphere and manager sphere, you can see the line being drawn there. And I think that's instructive because if you talk about, let's talk about an example about snow removal. I was talking to Jim yesterday about a council member, a commission member in Johnson County. We do snow plowing, right? Snow plow, and we snow plow through. We don't necessarily, a woman had come out to her driveway and shoveled the driveway, opened it all up. Our snow plow comes through, and guess what? We close up the driveway, right? So the commissioner said, oh, well, this is terrible, you know, can Congress go out there and move it? I said, I can't do that. Well, I'm going to go out and do it myself. Great, so he did open it up. You may have this experience, I don't know. My response is, that's great, I'm glad you did. But Commissioner, we have 600,000 people. Are you going to go ahead and do every one of those driveways as well? Well, no, I can't. So what's your policy? What indeed you want us to go ahead and do in that realm as far as that is concerned? So those sort of things come into play about how far the government wants to go ahead and do versus what the policy is going to be achieved. And having the phone picked up to go ahead and say, I want to go ahead and have my area snow plowed, great. The communication should occur, but the idea of saying that it indeed has to be done right away according to policy will be an area of conversation. Another way to look at it here is administrative levels about what is done and how is it done will be part of kind of that conversation as well. Perhaps a bit too detailed for our conversation here today, but it gives you a sense of that, about the policy administrative levels. What's the policy level, what's the administrative level, and who does what? I think what's important is to say is that from the community's perspective, vis-a-vis the elected officials, it really is determining what should be done. The administration side talks about how to do it. And I think that's the dynamic going through. What are some of the council responsibilities? And it's just strategic planning, visioning, big picturing thinker, being a trustee and a steward of the community as a whole. Representative, constituent advocate, that certainly is the issue. You know, Hannes's backyard got flooded. How do we solve Bob's problem? Hannes's problem with flooding in a way that meets our policies, or can we do that? That certainly is appropriate. Community building, I think that's a big thing to bring people together, which you not necessarily hear in the state legislature, but you certainly should hear that at the city level about what the community's doing, and oversight being part of it as well. Manager's responsibility, the community overall. Fundamentally, we as a profession want to go and ascribe to the Athenian oath, which is to leave communities better than we found them. Leave communities better than we found them in any way we can. And we talk about that quite a bit in our profession, in our ethics training and so forth. Now, respecting the majority, obviously, and what the majority rules, what we say in the profession is that the staff proposes, the governing body disposes, and whatever the governing body says goes, period. That's how it's supposed to work. That does not mean there's not a dialogue and understanding, but that is where we need to go. There are dual roles between being an advisor as well as an implementer are being part of that work. Partnerships, acceptable and sustainable activities, and outcome focused. There are conflicts to this particular relationship. Conflicting values that drive policymaking. Identify conditions that make public policy difficult. We don't have enough money. We don't have the right constituency, whatever. Describe perspectives of elected officials and staff. What is your perspective of what government should do and what government should not do? Those become obstacles. Fundamentally, we are, when indeed, and we talk about this, and we're between those things that are decisions that have no direct or clear answer. I'll use that term. And we call it between adaptive and technical issues. Let me give you an example. Technical issues, you want to go and build a bridge, right? The builder has to go ahead and satisfy so many pounds going on from that point for so many trucks. The answer is a technical answer. There is a mathematical formula to go and deal with that issue, right? Let's say probably a more adaptive issue is how do we deal with homeless? There's no particular issue about that. It's an adaptive challenge when it goes forward. And when you are dealing with adaptive challenges as a governing body, as Topeka probably has and will continue to be, we advocate that there are 4 different values that are in play at any one particular time. That what you do is you start playing politics, and that's not bad. And politics, in our view, is the balancing of those 4 different values. Representation. I got represented from my district. My district needs to have X, Y, Z. The majority told us should go and do it. We should go and do that aspect of it. Well placed. Balance that out with individual rights. I don't want, as an individual, I shouldn't have to go ahead and foot that particular bill because I'm not in the floodplain area. Why should I go and pay that sort of stuff? Individual rights. That's balancing off that way. Efficiency and effectiveness, professionalism, so forth. Can you pay for it? What's efficient and so forth thing? And then social equity. What I deal is being fairness. The idea of certain areas being affected more than other areas that need to be going balanced out. And the challenge is for the elected official that all 4 of those are in play all the time. I actually had a graphic that I couldn't bring over, which talks about balancing plates, keeping that kind of plate in the center from as far as that's concerned. And the reality is you can't have all 4 at the same time. And the challenges for elected officials is to really understand what constituency is going to be most impacted by the decision to be made and who's going to be affected by that. The thing we talk about is that you can't ignore any one particular value for too long without that kind of taking over the situation from that point. Governing bodies hierarchy, no hierarchy. Typically, you have 9 individuals. You have the mayor, yes, but they're all voting members. Vague task definition. What's my job to go and be as elected official? No specialization particularly. Reasonably so. Anybody can go and run for a city council position. Little feedback oftentimes about what you're supposed to be going and doing. And open meetings. And I like open meetings as far as that's concerned. However, and perhaps they have experiences, that my sense is that very little happens at the public meeting. It's mostly pronunciations of positions, rightfully so. Because people don't want to look foolish, if you will. They perceive being foolish about examining the issue and changing their minds, which is what is necessary for governance. You have an opinion, you have an idea, but you might need to be swayed by the information that comes forward. So that can be an impediment sometimes, that people are viewing more positions than they are really kind of exploring various issues going forward. So how do we go ahead and make that work? Well, facilitative leadership, know the various roles that you might want to play, goal setting, establish council protocols and stick with it. How long do you want to have people speak at the podium? What issues do we take? Which issues get top priority and which ones don't? Again, team building, and that's a cultural issue. How do you go and make sure everybody kind of works as a team and work with staff in partnership? Fundamentally, trying to figure out what the staff needs versus what the staff will provide versus the governing body can need as well. I'm not going to go through this because this is all, I'll use this graphic. It is helpful to understand that there are lenses, yet that indeed the governing body provides that lens of what the community can provide, and the city manager provides that lens with regards to what the staff can provide. So it kind of gives you an understanding about how that can work. I'm not going to go through all this, but I do want to end up with this. Summaries. Building the gap we talked about is essential to go and be an effective governance, translating what the community wants to have with what the staff is capable to go ahead and do. The role of governing body, again, is community building, not win-lose, but community building, and that is a cultural thing more than it is a structural thing. Good politics is about values, not the right answers, and stories really, really matter. Makes a difference. Value conflict requires compromise and negotiations, which we've heard very little of at various other levels of government. Do not ignore any value over a period of time. We talked about that. Democratic process is messy. Someone to be efficient and so forth. That's not how it was designed. It was designed to go and be messy, to be deliberative, and to kind of work those things through. Politics, administration are different ways of thinking. Remember that we're trying to be translators, build bridges, and align governing body with staff expectations is crucial. Here's what my suggestions might be as you talk about your work as a citizens committee with a very broad range. As you hear situations, and you will and should, I would offer that you should clearly articulate what problem or problems you are trying to solve, or the opportunity you're trying to take advantage of. And to do that in specific terms, because oftentimes in my experience, how you define the problem often leads to the possible solutions. So just saying, the government's not being responsive enough. Give some clarity. What do you mean? In what areas? What are you talking about providing responsiveness? How responsiveness should it be? That whole issue, I think, will really be helpful to make meaningful suggestions that will actually be implemented. The second thing I'd offer is to distinguish, if you can, between structural issues and governmental implementation issues. Do you need to change the form of government to go and resolve these issues? Perhaps some issues might be part of that. Are there structural implementation put in place in the local government to go ahead and help relieve those issues, perhaps? Or is it really an implementation and a cultural issue, one that requires relationship building and so forth? So I appreciate the chance to ramble on to a degree. I think what I can be most helpful is to be a resource. My time with Johnson County, I went through 2 charter commissions. We have to go and do a charter review commission every 10 years. And we've done so the last 20 years. We did do a charter, and so our organization for the county is much similar to a city. The big differences is that we have 32 different departments versus 8 or 9 that Topeka might have. We deal with all the human services, and we're the translator between the state and local governments. Those sort of things, and I can go on and on about the differences between counties and cities and what those look like administratively. I know a big conversation last time in 2014 was the idea of county consolidation, or at least some effort to go ahead and deal with those issues in a more, amicable and effective way. I can comment about those as well as how city managers work and so forth, both in large and small communities. I hope I've been helpful in some respect to kind of give you something that you might want to think about. I probably can be most helpful by answering any questions you might have. Turn it back to you.
Let me go first, Hannes. And we talked about this a little bit the other day. Living in a time where it's citizen distrust of government, that loss of trust, trickles down from the federal to the state, and I think to the local government as well. So that's times we live in. What does a city government do to try to prevent that loss of trust? Is it just going out and doing your job the best you can, or does there need to be some affirmative action, some outreach, some civics lesson, so people understand what's being done? I'll give you a quick example. I mean, you talk about snow plowing. We had a blizzard, and some streets got cleared off right away, others did not, and there was some, I think probably a lot of phone calls made to city council members and to the manager's office. It's a flashpoint, right? That people say, I'm paying outrageous property taxes, and this is what I get. I can't get out of my driveway for 3 days. But how do you? That's a clumsy way of asking a question, I guess. How do you prevent that from becoming that festering and becoming the falling on fertile soil of people who've been told from higher ups never to trust government, And so, here's an example.
I think there's always been that element of not trusting government. I think the thing that has changed in the last 10 years, in my experience, is the need for communication. There's several levels, but at least one level that strikes me right now is the use and effective use of social media. And that really, because of the demise, I'll use that term, of the local, the third rail of politics, I guess, that being public media. An example, just as a parenthetical, when I came to Johnson County in 2001, we had 2 TV stations, 3 radio stations, and 3 newspapers at every meeting. We have none now. 650,000 people. And I think the same thing happened in Topeka as well with those sort of things. And the absence of that, of a local news source, talking about local situations, local governments have been required to amplify that level of communication, primarily for social media. The biggest transformation to me, I think, in the C-suite office, if you will, is it not just having the city manager and assistant city manager, but also having director of communications at that level, because nobody else was reporting on it. And I think that becomes a big part of that. It's the level of communication and the instantaneous and the timeliness of that communication helps build trust. If an organization, if a governmental body, a city does not respond to a tweet or a next door post or something that within a reasonable time frame, people assume what has been posted is accurate. And then you come out and have to go ahead and redo that sort of stuff. It becomes an issue where, who's on first, who's on second, and so forth, who has to tell the truth. So I think communication at that level really is important today, because we've given everybody the ability to have a big microphone and say, I heard gunshots at 12th and McVicker. We need to go ahead and what's going on there. If you don't recognize that, monitor it, and respond to it, people start going off the rails. So I think that's one way to go ahead and build trust. The second of all, which kind of is a different level, is making sure that individuals feel like they have been seen and heard. They may not get the answer they want to have, but they want to have an answer. They want to have a dialogue. So if an individual calls back and calls up the council member from a certain district, District 5 or District 6, whatever, says, my area's not been plowed, that commissioner or council member calls Dr. Perez. Dr. Perez kind of passes it on to Public Works to go and do that. Then there should be the communication from that individual back to that person, as well as to the council member, saying, here's what the situation is. Here's what we can do, here's what we can't do. I appreciate your conversation. Here's what our policy exists to be. Some way to go and represent them that you've been seen and you've been heard and you've been valued as an individual citizen. That's critical as well. Because if you don't take care of that individual's conversation, they then talk to their friends and neighbors at the coffee shop and say, well, I called, Hannes in District 5 and nobody ever gave me a call back. That has to occur. And that means that the infrastructure on the administrative side has to be there to go ahead and provide that level of communication, that relationship building, that understanding that that individual citizen is valuable and that indeed has been seen and heard. And mind you, I use the term between citizen and customer differently, because we are not a vending machine as government's concerned. It's not you pay your dollars, you get your snow plowed, right? You're part of a governmental structure. And citizens have an obligation to go and uphold democratic values, which means that the collective decides what's going on, as opposed to saying, you call me up, I get your snow plowed. No, that's not how it works. But we need to provide that civic understanding at the individual level to say, this is how government works. I'm not at privy to go ahead and snow plow your come out and get my truck to snow plow you on your street Because guess what? We're going to put all those resources on major arterials first, as by virtue of policy, because what that means is that individuals can get out and travel to the hospital and the schools when they need to. But that communication has to occur. I went on and on about that answer, but I think it gives you some sense of my sense.
It's kind of a segue to my second question, and I'll shut up. The closest I can come to making a criticism of the city manager form of government is that I have seen, and I'm not talking about Topeka, but I have seen in communities in Kansas where the city manager consciously or otherwise becomes a barrier between the public and the elected officials. And sometimes that's initiated really by the elected officials who want that barrier, who want to be able to, they get a phone call from a constituent, they say, well, I'm going to talk to the city manager and he or she will take care of it, and that's the end of the involvement by the council member. And whether anything actually comes from that, whether contact is made and what comes from that is, not the council member's problem anymore. Other times it may be more of what the city manager wants to have, the relationship that he or she wants to have, it being in control of the community. I don't know that either scenario reflects on the structure at all as it does maybe the personalities of the individuals involved, both on the part of the managers and the council members or the elected officials. So any thoughts?
Certainly, I think there is no guarantee that the city manager in that position is going to do a good job. I think the fail-safe mechanism is that the governing body can remove that person wherever they want to. And my experience is that when those issues become to a level that the community starts paying attention to it, that things will change. Either the behavior of the city manager will change, or the administrative staff will change, or they get a new person to replace that, as opposed to the strong mayor, where you have to wait 4 years before any sort of change can occur. I think that's part of the value of the city manager form of government, the council manager form of government, is that the manager is beholden to the collective, and at any point in time, they serve at the pleasure of the governing body. Now, there's also no guarantee of good governing body members being elected either. They may indeed use that as a smokescreen for their next election. I passed it on to Hannes to go ahead and take care of it, knowing full well that I also voted against putting any more money into snow removal, but I'm going to pass it off to him anyway. Those sort of things. You can't stop that either. My experience is at that situation, the public is pretty dang smart, is what I would say. Eventually, the public recognizes that and decides to go and replace that council member. So there's no guarantee here in terms of that kind of work. But my experience is the vast majority of managers that are sustaining their position do have that relationship and have that understanding both ways, and are understand the value of community building and relationships to actually make that conversation to work in this situation, and make sure the constituent, the citizen, is taken care of to the best of their ability, at least communication is made, and to do their level best to communicate with the governing body member as well. If they don't respond, at least you can go and do it. And that's now being done primarily for email. Councilman Hannes, I want to let you know, I got a call yesterday, and Jim Calp let me know about his street not being plowed. I did talk to him, these sort of things, so I just want to let you know. So they can't feign in the future that they weren't indeed having communications about. No communication, in my viewpoint, though, is not the answer. You've got to resolve the issue, and it becomes something you've got to do. Questions?
Questions for Hannes?
Yeah, thank you for your presentation, your comments. I really appreciate it.
Good.
Yeah. And I think we're circling around the unknown, something we can't address is the citizens and their level of engagement in whatever level of government we're talking about. Some of the onus is on we, the people, to do our role. And if they don't, they don't. I mean,
I think that's true. I think there are some things that you can do.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Certainly,
as far
I think
as
you can certainly you'll have open meetings, and I think that's good. And you have conferences, I think that's good as well. A situation you may want to consider that some organizations have done is doing a citizen survey. In my experience is that if you want to know what the citizens feel, ask them. There's a great deal of cynicism these days about surveys not going anywhere. So there has to be that level of trust to go ahead and say that you're going to do something with the information I give you. In my experience, the the public meetings are very, very useful. It highlights, however, those that are really disgruntled about something, which may be the majority, maybe not. But you may want to test that out and see what does the really majority feel. It might be a very simple situation to say, citizens of Topeka, what do you think is going well in your Topeka government? And what do you think needs improvement? And I think you'll be amazed by the number of people that will respond in cogent and appropriate ways. That can be part of your basket of inputs as you talk about it. So I think that gets past, I think, what can be manipulative issues at the public forum. Let's go and get everybody on the bus with our neighborhood and make sure that everyone can understands that our neighborhood has to go and be taken care of. Great. That's one neighborhood out of 30 or 40 in Topeka, which may be totally appropriate, but may be balanced out by a larger understanding of what the community does. So you may want to entertain that. And then all you can do is broadcast that, highlight through social media, allow people to go and make those comments electronically and harvest them. It can be done fairly efficiently, perhaps maybe even fairly easily. There are certain entities that do those kind of scientifically driven surveys, which you may want to consider. But if the finances aren't there, you might want to at least provide an open forum on social media that says, here's a call to everybody. Mayor, please allow everybody to go and say, let's go ahead and have a general understanding about what's good and what's not, what can be improved in Topeka government. The challenge might be is you're then going to have to whittle down about this huge basket of issues about what you think you can do something about or not. But it gives you at least a starting point.
Hannes, on the subject of surveys, I believe this has come up, looking at the city's website, if I'm correct, the most recent survey that was done in Topeka was 2021, and prior to that was 2018, and prior to that was 2008. They contracted with consultants that I think are pretty well known. I was surprised in looking at a news report about the 2021 survey, which was just a random sampling, and the consultants said that they were shooting for a minimum response of 400 households. 400 out of a community of 130,000 plus. I'm not sure how you get statistically significant responses from that small of a sample, if that's what they end up with. I don't know if they exceeded that or not. But I guess my question is, do you have some thoughts about the frequency of doing community surveys and how widespread the participation should be in the survey?
First of all, I think that surveys are very, very helpful. And I think statistically valid, I'll leave it to the statisticians about how they do that. I can tell you that Johnson County does surveys, I believe now annually. I think we started out every other year, now we do it annually. The city of Olathe, I think, does them 4 times a year as a perception survey. The world is changing so rapidly that people's perceptions change. Now, the trade-off is how many resources do you want to put in to kind of gather that information? The numbers do not, the number of participation is not my area of expertise. But what we do challenge the idea of getting statistically valid responses. And responses that, in our case in Johnson County, provided, insight into each district about how each district felt the county was performing. So individual council members could dig down and say, how do my people feel about these certain areas? Maybe even some neighborhoods. How does my neighborhood feel about certain areas? And that provides some clarity about where issues are concerned. I think doing it every other year is really infrequent. I think that many communities are going to an annual perception survey. I say the word perception appropriately because it really is a perception. But as we know in today's society, perception becomes reality. But it's tremendously helpful to kind of do that touchstoning on a regular basis, and one that intervals that provides some expertise or some insight, and to most importantly act upon the information. I think because again the cynicism is there about saying I gave you my opinion, you didn't want to do it. Is a good example. Many years ago in another community, we wanted to go and do a survey about increasing fees for the library to go ahead and get more library services. Surveys came back saying yes, go ahead and increase the fee. Governing body said no. They didn't want to go ahead and do that. So what is the trust then about those individuals saying, I gave you my opinion, we should go and have a really viable library service. when you're willing to go ahead and pay for it, but you don't want to go ahead and do it. So those sort of things become really important. And there's a lot of good conversation with the governing body. Don't ask a question that you indeed are not going to do something about. And there's levels of engagement. We talk about community engagement, some really good scholarship about community engagement, about really what you want to have. In some cases, the governing body just wants to go and have a sales pitch. What they really want to have is a survey that confirms what they believe. And people are really smart. They can smell that smoke screen, as opposed to saying, we're going to actually do something where you tell us. And you have to kind of figure out how far you want to go on that continuum. Because governing body members legitimately have said, I was elected to make these decisions. I didn't want to go and abdicate my responsibility to the survey. Legitimate point. Then why'd you ask us for the survey? I went off the field a bit. I think the frequency is important. I think the statistically valid is important. It would require others that have more expertise about what's statistically valid than I can provide. I don't think it's the N number. I think it is the statistically valid number that works. Let's look at the U.S. Census survey. They survey population information. It turns out the U.S. Census survey is probably more accurate than the actual census itself, which is done every 10 years. So I do believe that surveys are helpful and that they can be statistically valid.
Yeah, and I should clarify that when I'm talking about these surveys that I ran across were ones where you're talking about community-wide services, police, fire, water, all city services. The city does have a history of using more targeted surveys. I think one of the more recent ones was a community survey for fire chief or police chief, I think. What are people looking for in the characteristics of a police chief?
Great.
And the planning department, I'm on the planning commission here, and we've done some surveys in the past and have one out there right now about on a particular topic, what the community thinks of that. So those are done. I don't know if there's a sense of whether we survey too much or not, if there's survey fatigue, but
the survey fatigue, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting, I apologize. The survey fatigue, I think, is probably overrated because you're not asking the same person.
Yeah.
And you've got 130,000 people here. I don't think you've surveyed every one of them. So certainly those that have an interest will respond, those that don't won't. But I think people appreciate being asked. And I think the best thing I would say is if you want to know what people think, ask them.
But your recommendation to us would be an annual survey.
I think it would. Dr. Perez will have some better ideas. It becomes the idea of saying, is that dovetail? Is that administratively sustainable? Is that an expense you can afford to go ahead and do? That's probably a conversation with him. My sense is he has some pretty good ideas in that area. You might want to query from him. I think it's most helpful annually because that helps develop the budget scenarios. And like I said, some communities are going 4 times a year to get really a sense and a pulse of what's going on. And some people do it 4 times a year, and they'll also do that in addition to specific issues. What do you feel about how we're doing on solid waste collection? Those sort of things. We witness what the private sector does. Every time you drop off your vehicle for servicing, how many surveys do you get, right? Every time you walk into, how we doing, and then into the restroom, constant survey. We have felt like that data is not important. I think it is to get an understanding about how the citizens feel about the services you're performing. That's my viewpoint. And I think my sense is Dr. Perez has some ideas in that area as well.
The city has an ombudsman position. And one of the reasons that I asked for the organizational charts to be passed out to the committee is I think maybe later on in this meeting we'll take a look at that and see if there are positions that we want to ask people to come in and speak. But I'd be interested in hearing from the ombudsman. But the position that exists right now, that the ombudsman is under the city manager's office, reports to the city manager. Do you have thoughts about whether that is the way to do it? And I guess the alternative would be if it reported to the elected officials.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of influence and power sharing. My first reaction to it requires a little more thought, is that the ombudsman should indeed be under the city manager's hiring and firing issue, just like the police chief and fire chief and so forth. An alternative would be to have the ombudsman report directly to the governing body. Then what you've done structurally is put the ombudsman at the same level politically as the city or county manager. And I think that creates confusion. The snow removal issue comes into play. I'm going to give a call. I'm the district member. Bob gives me a call about a snow removal. I'm the council member for that district. I give a call to the ombudsman. The ombudsman then calls Sam over here on the snow truck. What do you think Sam's going to go ahead and do? Sam's going to go ahead and do exactly what the ombudsman said to satisfy that constituent, I would suspect, as opposed to saying to the ombudsman, "Oh, I can't do that because indeed my directions come from the city manager." Now it becomes, whose direction do I have according to what policy? Yeah. So I think it's a negotiated situation. In my case, in my sense, where ombudsmen are there, it's a relationship to say, having an understanding about where that conversation goes. How do you go ahead and cut through red tape certainly is appropriate, but to give them that level of a huge samurai versus being part of the organization, I think is the distinction I would make.
Did you hear that position in Johnson County?
We did not. We did have, though, an internal auditor that did report, whole audit division that did report to the governing body, which I felt was appropriate because that really is the watchdog for the entire organization, and that was a relationship. It's much like you have the legislature with the legislative post-audit. So I think that did work, but as far as an ombudsman for an individual for immediate action, I think those are great positions, but I think it should be at the discretion of the city and county manager.
So in Johnson County, if I've got a complaint about the operation, I make a phone call to the department that I'm concerned about, the fire department, something they didn't perform the way I think they should, so I contact the fire department, and they have a procedure for handling a citizen complaint.
Yes, they do, and part of that procedure is to inform the city manager's office or the county manager's office if it's that level of issue to let you know about what the situation is. So it's the communication is important. I think there are structures to allow communication to individual departments that can be workable. It's more efficient that way. It's also an understanding among that collective executive team, if you will, that we work as a team on the executive side to administer the policies uniformly. And if it's a policy issue, then that gets worked through, I think, the conversations and a conversation with the governing body. And if there's a particular issue that you didn't do my street and I've been out here waiting, then sure, go into the street if that's on the issue. There's some sort of issue going on that we'd have a truck breakdown and solve that problem. But what we did allow and encourage individuals to go voice their opinion to the individual department heads to go and get things done and have that communication.
Yeah, questions for Hannes?
Hannes, thank you. This is extremely helpful. When I read your PowerPoint, and through this, I see an exciting door for us because, first of all, I think we can help our Topeka understand what actually and how this form of government, the city manager form, is. I think there is a lot of people that don't understand. Like, I wasn't even clear until I had what you gave us. So I think that's a great opportunity. But also, when you brought up that the council member is the representative, right? But they're not just the representative, community building. I see a lot of, they're doing the job of it, but the community building aspects, I think that's an exciting area we could perhaps help, bridge some gaps. But I really appreciated this. This was extremely helpful.
Good.
And I got some clarity on some things. And so I'm just excited for us. And thank you so much, because this information, I'm clear now. I'm clear.
Good.
Where I was a little murky because I wasn't quite understanding, like, okay, it seems like there's two chiefs and, and that's the average public perception, I believe, of this form of city government. Like, what does the mayor do? What does the city manager? So, yeah,
Good.
this was extremely helpful.
I appreciate it. It is a partnership.
Yes.
And I think respecting both sides of the administration and the heavy lifting that council members have to do, because they have to provide that level of communication, but they also play many roles. One is constituent services, but also reflecting the entire community. And they have to be willing to go ahead and explain to the citizen about what's going on. We can go ahead and plow your street, but do you want to go ahead and pay 4 more mills to make that work?
Right. Yeah, this is so helpful. I think culture is a big thing.
Yeah.
When you said the culture.
The culture.
I think we can really help define overall culture, which will then help how the government is run.
And honest, I wasn't expecting an open offer from you to come back and help us once we get things rolling and decide, well, there's no issues, there's nothing to worry about,
Yeah.
nothing to study, or conversely, if we, I guess we,
Happy to do it. You know, I'm a community building nerd. I watched your meeting last time, so I'm the guy that goes to the hotel room and turns on the community channel, those sort of things, and watch the commission meeting. I'm happy to be helpful any way I can.
any questions for Hannes?
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Hannes. Appreciate it very much. And by the way, when you come back, Hannes didn't do in his background, the one thing that he should have done, he has a family history as to how he came to Kansas that is one of the most extraordinary stories you'll ever hear. But if he comes back, he will share that with us. I mean, it is really,
Happy to do it.
it's really amazing. It really is.
I'm a Kansan growing up in Dodge City, Kansas, from German immigrants, so yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is talking about some upcoming meetings. I think Amanda was going to talk to council members about inviting them. Do you know where we stand on that?
And maybe Brenda can answer this better than I can. I do know that an invite was sent to the council members.
I'm sorry, Kate.
I said maybe Brenda can answer this question better than I can. I do know that an invite was sent out to all the council members. I do not know if we have received any responses yet.
Correct. Yeah, so it was just yesterday, I emailed the body as a whole, so I haven't heard back from them yet, but it's been less than 24 hours. So I know that as soon as they're able to get to that email, they will be willing. I'm sure there'll be more than one for the February 19th meeting. And I offered up either they could come in person and speak, or if they would prefer to, to give us written comments, depending on their time that they have available. So I provided both those options for them. And then I know on March 5th, the mayor will be here. He can be here about 12:30. He can't be here probably like at the beginning of the meeting at 11, but he can come in at 12:30. His schedule will allow, so.
What about our manager, Dr. Perez, our new manager? Has he,
I haven't heard anything from him, but I
Will
will.
you reach out to
Yep,
him?
I absolutely will. I'll reach out to him and see what time he has available.
okay. Question,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
do we want to go deeper into the organizational? Do we want to go to department heads or any of these managers that we have on our front sheet? Or do we want to hear from the council, the manager, and the mayor first, and then go deeper into the structure?
My thought is listening, I mean, given Jim Reardon's experience, that they got a lot of input from council members, which,
Right.
I mean, that'd be good. I mean, hear from the council members and the mayor on March 5. I penciled in some thoughts for the next couple meetings, and again, if we get the city council members in for the 19th, as many as we could fit in, as many are willing to come. If we had additional time, we could go through the organizational charts and see if there are other folks that we want to make sure that we talk to. But the one thing that I would really like to add on the March 5 meeting, along with the mayor, I mentioned the ombudsman. I've never met the ombudsman. I don't know anything about her, except the news reports when she was hired. But I'm just kind of intrigued by the fact that we have that position. I don't know how high profile it is in the community, if people know that it's there or not. But you have the position. I think it needs to be. Yes, Brenda.
So the position is vacant at the time. I know that our community engagement director, she's probably picking up some of those services. The position is vacant at this moment as of about, I believe, a week ago. We had that person leave, and so our community engagement director is now serving in that capacity also. So I can reach out to Monique and see if she can provide some input to us.
Is there anybody serving in a
Our
interim
community
capacity?
engagement director, Monique, is picking up those duties. So I will reach out to her and see if she can appear. And you said you would like it on March 5th?
Yeah, let's get
Thank you.
Monique's
All
availability.
right, thank you.
I know that she's extremely busy.
She
She's
is.
picking up pretty much 3 or 4 different jobs right now.
Yes.
Yes.
She's also serving as the interim DEI director, so
Yep.
she's got a lot of community engagement stuff
I
to
see.
handle.
She does.
So getting her availability would be great. And that's, yeah, on the second page that we have. I know that we are on limited time because we've got 3 minutes before this thing is supposed to end. I know that we'd also heard from, in the past, we've heard from business community leaders. It would be very easy for us to reach out to the president of the Greater Topeka Chamber of Commerce or even the CEO of the Greater Topeka Partnership. I'm sure that they will have some context. I think that would be an easy one to ask if we wanted to get. But I think we've got a good schedule ahead of us. I know that, the next 2 meetings we'll hear from city council members, the mayor, hopefully the city manager. I think we're on the right track just to get a good groundwork of people coming in.
Issues, just to learn about the issues.
And it looks like that the city council was notified because we've got
We got
one of them.
right here. Yes.
a good government group in Topeka that has carried water for Topeka with the state legislature in the past is the League of Women Voters. And I would very much like to reach out to them to see if they would send a representative over. Are you all in agreement on that?
Sure.
And maybe that could be a part of the March 5 meeting with the mayor. March 26, city manager. Would we be ready to hear from the city manager by that time if he's available?
Some of these are public input meetings. Which ones are those? Help me out.
What we had decided last time was that we were going to make every meeting available for comment. I
But-
believe that's correct.
I thought we designated 2 meetings in the evening. Yeah, the 19th an evening meeting and the 26th of March is a
Right.
evening meeting.
March
Right.
26 is an evening meeting, yeah.
I think we just did that if people did want to come in.
Okay.
Everyone can correct me if I'm
Gotcha.
wrong, but
Gotcha.
I don't think we set it out as this is specifically a
Like an
public
all-call.
input. Yeah, this is just if somebody does want to show up, there's an evening option as well.
Gotcha.
Zachary mentioned the Chamber of Commerce, and I had given some thought to, in terms of the business community, the Chamber of Commerce, Downtown Topeka, Inc., and JADO. I don't, what are your thoughts about the Joint Economic Development Outfit, the city-county group?
I mean, you're going to hear from most of them when
I'm
we
sorry?
hear from you're going to hear from most of them when you hear from the city council.
Yeah.
Um,
There's overlap.
Because that is JADO is elected leaders. And I don't see any, and I don't really see any value in talking to too many county leaders because we have nothing to do with what they're up to.
What you guys' familiarity with the Topeka Justice Unity and Ministry Project? Joan?
I know that they were all at the city council. though.
Yeah. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're at 1 o'clock, so we either need to extend the meeting or adjourn the meeting. So you can extend it past the time, but we've only got this noticed from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. So if you guys would like to go past 1 p.m., we need to make a motion to do that.
Yeah, we could do a motion to extend the meeting by so many minutes, or since we still have items to discuss, we can table this item and postpone or defer the other items to the next meeting, if you want to conclude the meeting at this point.
I move that we table for the next meeting, inviting other groups such as Jump to, for their input, and I move that we adjourn.
Are we, so
And that's
pushing
right, you
all
move on.
agenda items to the next one?
We're going to put
Okay.
this off till next, and we're gonna adjourn.
Okay,
and-
but help me out here. We're, on the 19th, we're talking to some or all the city council members, and hopefully we have members of the public. It's a night meeting. On March 5, we have Mayor Padilla and the League of Women Voters. Okay, and then maybe members of the public. March 26, City Manager Perez. There are a couple living former mayors in this community. Do you see value in talking to, and one of those was the mayor that appointed Jim Reardon, Larry Walgast. Do you see a point in?
Time is up, and I
Yeah,
propose
we
we put that
can't meet
discussion off to our next meeting.
So,
And I'm not saying not invite them, but let's have that discussion item come up next meeting.
so just for clarification, is the motion to table item agenda number 4 and 5 and 6
Yeah.
to the next meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
Who was the second on that?
Second.
Okay, very good.
And
The proposed rules of the committee, just very briefly. I have,
We
I-
can't,
adjourned.
we can't.
We're adjourned.
we need to have a vote. We need to have a vote on the motion and then determine how we're going to proceed from there.
So you want to go by voice vote? All in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign? All right. So we have 5 yes, motion carries. So we will table the last 3 items of the agenda for the next meeting, and the meeting is adjourned.